Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. I spoke with this group, I think maybe 3 years ago, and there may have been different people in the room at that point. You were just starting out with the grants for college readiness, and it sounds like a lot has been done since then, and I'm excited to learn more about that while I'm here today, especially about what you're trying with Alpena High School. And I think you guys are out front on that, and I'm not aware of any other state that's yet implementing that, although I've heard others discussing it. So I've got kind of a two-part presentation here today. After Don and I talked, it sounded like there were two separate topics that, they're connected, but two separate topics that would be of interest to this group. So one is looking at multiple measures assessment for placement, and that's something we've been, we're in the fourth year of a 5-year study on that, and I'm happy to share some of the things that we've learned from that. And, you know, also interested in hearing about anything that you guys are doing. Part two is to share some information from an ongoing study that we've had called Reshaping the College Transition. So looking at, you know, senior year interventions, especially what we call transition courses. Do you guys use that? So senior year courses that are intended to help students to be college ready, and some related kinds of topics. So before we go any further, people from colleges, is that everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody not from a college? Just curious about whether we get any high school people in this group. Okay. Colleges implementing summer bridge programs. Okay. Colleges implementing senior year transition courses of some kind. And I don't know if this is separate, but colleges implementing Alpena High School. Okay. Are there any other models that people are using? No? Okay. Just wanted to get a sense of who's doing what. Okay. So let's talk about multiple measures. Let's talk about assessment and placement first. Let me just ask about that too. Are any colleges, are any of you from colleges that are currently using some kind of a multiple measures assessment and placement system? Okay. Several. Okay, good. Okay, a little bit of background, and I think this group probably doesn't need much background on this. So we have a lot of students who are starting in our colleges needing at least one remedial or developmental education course. And that's actually true of our partners in the four-year space as well. So it's not just a community college issue, it's something that colleges across the country are involved in and concerned about. And we know that there are a lot of reasons why students who start off in developmental or remedial education are less likely to graduate. Some of it obviously has to do with the preparation that they come in with, but there's a certain part that has to do with what actually happens once they get to college. So, you know, going through the placement process, taking developmental education and so on. And so for the part that's happening at the college, you know, there's certainly a lot of work going on to make some changes in two main areas. One is in how students are placed, and the other is in how developmental education courses are offered. So there's a lot of work going on in this area, but we're really going to focus here on placement. So what's motivating this change is the idea that we should only place students into developmental education if they really do need that kind of extra help. And there have been states that have gone to kind of an extreme and said, well, you know, if developmental education doesn't do such a good job, maybe we just shouldn't offer it. And I think many, you know, certainly those of us at CCRC believe it needs to be available to students. I mean, we need opportunities for students to improve their skills, you know, as they come into college, because, you know, there are all sorts of reasons why people need a chance to do that. They've been out of school for a while, they didn't have, you know, weren't exposed to a great curriculum in high school, maybe they didn't work hard in high school, whatever it is, they need that second chance. But we want to make sure students going into those courses are the ones that really do need that help. So my colleagues at CCRC, especially Judy Scott Clayton and Clyde Belfield, and there have been some other people doing this work, looked at whether students were being well placed using existing placement tests. So at the time they did the research, it was AccuPlacer and Compass. Now we've just got AccuPlacer, but basically these findings were pretty parallel for the two tests they looked at. And so what they were doing is predicting student success in first college level courses using a whole range of possible variables. And then they compared that to how students, the prediction of just using a placement test, and kind of see how those two measured up. And what they were looking for is especially the extremes. So students who were placed into college level, but were actually predicted to fail using a richer set of measures. And then students who were placed into developmental ed but could have gotten a B or better on, if they'd been placed into a college level course. So those are the two things we're concerned about, right? So we call it overplacement on the one hand and underplacement on the other hand. So what they found is that, there are a lot of students who are being placed correctly by the placement tests. Those are the ones in the box where, it says their ability was developmental level and the exam said they were developmental level, so they're good. And the college level, matched to college level, were good. But a lot of students were being poorly placed. So what we see is we see 5 to 6% being overplaced, meaning they're put into college level, but probably should have been developmental, but considerably more being underplaced. So, in this study, 18 to 29%. So, we've got a lot of students who are not starting off in the right place and with all the issues that go with that. So, what to do about that? This is, okay, just to kind of break that down further. When they looked at the possible measures that could be used from this data set, they looked at placement test scores, they looked at the high school GPA, they looked at what would happen if you put high school GPA and placement test scores together, and then they looked at other, those things plus whatever other data they could find, basically. And what they got is a profile like this. So this is an example from one college, and this is actually one college we're working with in the research that we're doing. And so don't worry about the numbers too much, but this profile is something we see in every college we work in. So I don't know if you can see this, but column 1 is high school GPA alone, right? So if you just use the high school GPA, that's a pretty good predictor. Column 2 is the test alone, not so good, right? If you combine the high school GPA and the test, you get better results. And if you combine the full model, and in these colleges, that usually meant years out of high school, type of high school diploma earned, and sometimes some high school test information. That was, giving you better results. So, yeah.
Just a question on the data. So this is saying that in English, 4.8% of the students successfully completed C or better?
No, good question. So this is the amount of the variation that was accounted for. So, one thing you'll see here is a whole bunch of variations not accounted for. There are all sorts of reasons why students don't do well in their first college level courses. But what you see is the tests are really not doing a good job of predicting what's going to happen, right? And GPA generally is doing a better job. Now, like I said, these are just this is one college, and different colleges have different courses, they have different, student profiles and so on. But almost universally, you're seeing that of any measure you can use, the high school GPA is going to be the one that does the best job of predicting how students will do in that first college level English and math course. Any other questions about any of this so far?
But this is, if we're seeing the data correctly,
Yeah.
this is saying that all of this isn't really a good predictor.
Right. Yeah. Basically, there are a bunch of so many other things that happen, that affect outcomes. But we still have to, place students somehow. So, what do we do? But yeah, that's an extremely important point. Okay. So, this is what we know so far. Students who are starting off in developmental education are less likely to complete college. We need better assessment systems. And of the measures that we regularly have available to us in colleges, high school GPA is the best predictor. Now, there could be many other things that could predict, but it's hard to get your hands on them, right? And, so multiple measures. So generally, more information is going to at least improve your predictions. So that's one of the things we saw in the last slide. And we may also want to take into account the, different student groups we're seeing. So students who've been out of school for, out of high school for a while, we may need some information on them. There may be other things that we want to take into account. Some people, for example, and we'll talk more about this, are looking at non-cognitive assessment measures as one possibility to take into account that might pick up some of what we're saying, we're seeing is not accounted for here. So if you, say you're a college that decides you want to get involved in using multiple measures, there are actually 3 things you've got to think about. There's what measures you're going to take into account. Are we going to make these slides available? Let me just see if we can. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know where maybe we could send that to this group or something. So we've got to take into account, figure out what measures we're going to use, and there's 2 categories of those. There's ones that the college can administer, and then there's ones that you've got to get from the high school or from outside you've got to get them from the student or somewhere, right? And then you've got to figure out what to do with them once you've got them. So there are different ways of thinking about that. You might, a fairly simple system would say, okay, if say you've got your 11th grade standardized test score, if you get a certain score on that, or say on the ACT, or I don't know what the state, what's being used in New Jersey, but that you're not going to have to test at all, right? Or you might say, if you have a certain high school GPA, you don't have to test at all. So that would be like a waiver system. Decision bands, maybe if you test within a certain, maybe you take the AccuPlacer, and is that what's used in New Jersey? Okay, so if you test within a certain range, we're going to look at other things. You might use an algorithm, and that's what we use for our study. So we actually looked at the historical data of the colleges we were working with and looked at what actually predicted success in their college math and English courses and set up a system. Using those weights basically. So, we would do the analysis and figure out how much weight should go to placement scores, how much weight should go to high school GPA, and that kind of thing. And then directed self-placement. I mean, students in some states, like for example in Florida, are given information and they get to make the decision themselves as to, if they're a high school graduate, as to whether they need remedial education or not. So you've got to figure out your system, and then last of all, you've got to be clear on what you want to use the results for. So, mainly it's going to be for placement into traditional courses, but if you have like an ALP, or if you have multiple math pathways, maybe you need to think about alternative coursework. And you may want to think about whether, and some colleges do, think about whether students who place into certain categories need extra support services. So those are the things you might want to be thinking about. Okay, so whenever we hit a slide that has yellow at the top, this is a time for a conversation at your tables. And if you're at a table with too many people, feel free to move to another. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to think about these measures and the ones you would or wouldn't use. We're going to talk about it briefly. Okay, let's hear from a couple of people. What things came up in your conversation?
So I took the grit questionnaire,
Yeah.
went online and found it. So I guess the question that we all had is, how do you use that for placements? Like what role does it?
Well, it's, so what you're looking for with the non-cognitive assessments is something that measures students, some of the factors that are associated with doing well in college, like time management, motivation, perseverance. I mean, grit gets at kind of the perseverance question, right? And it has been correlated with, I've got it on the slide later on, but like I think GPA and persistence in college.
Right.
So, those are the kinds of things that you're hoping to add in. Now, there's less research supporting its use than some of the other,
Because it's based on self-perception, and that can be not accurate.
Based on self-perception,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. And anytime you're using one of these questionnaires, you're gonna have that, yeah.
Okay.
But you hope students will, answer accurately, and you look and, you can look in your college data and see if it did make any difference.
Right.
Yeah. So, what other discussions did you have? Anything? thought about or did or didn't think would be a good measure?
We just struggle with the variety of high schools in our area and
Yeah.
assessing course grades and high school GPA.
Yeah.
How that can vary from high school to high school, and how do you standardize that or interpret it fairly?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot, and I actually have a slide on that one because it's one that comes up so often, so let me put that one out for a minute. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
We were talking about instances where you have data that are, or measures that are sometimes diametrically opposed. So you have a decent grade in 12th grade English, but poor scores on the AccuPlacer, on the SAT, on the PARC. And so, how do you make that decision?
right, yeah, right. So all those kind of decision rules have to be figured out ahead of time so that, so that you don't have a counselor in a room trying to sort it out with a student. Yeah, so if you can do the kind of analysis I talked about where you look at your own college data and see what, see which ones best predict, that's one way to do it. Another is to draw on past research. And the other question is, do you always give students the benefit of the doubt? Could they, if they can do well on any of these, should you take that? Or should you, use, some combination together? And people have come out on different sides of that. Okay, those are really good points. Just to mention a couple things, those kind of writing examples there at the end seem like a great idea, take a lot of work. It's one of those things people take into account. Career computer skills, these are all examples of measures that we've seen used somewhere. As you're thinking about guided pathways, do you want to make that part of, part of the early assessment process? Those are the kinds of things you can think about. So, high school GPA. So I've been pushing the idea that this is the best measure among the ones we have available. Among the ones that we have. But it's not always easy to get your hands on. And it depends on, some colleges expect a college transcript when student at the time of admission. Others don't. Some of them just require like evidence that a student graduated. So there are several ways that this can be handled. Students bringing a transcript, having a connection with the high school so that they're sending over transcripts for any student who expresses interest in your college. In some states, they're actually working out at the state level. That's a pipe dream in New York. I know about New Jersey, but it's not going to happen for a while anyway. And then self-report. So we're working with some colleges in Minnesota who've decided to use self-report, and there is some evidence that that students do report accurately. So I just kind of put some of that research over there. It's something that we're going to be looking at as we do the study in Minnesota to see, first of all, how accurate it is, and second of all, whether it seems to be, predictive, whether it seems to do a good job of predicting how students will do. One other thought is, 11th grade GPA has been shown to be highly correlated with the 12th grade GPA, and in California they're regularly accepting that. And if anybody's interested in the research on that, we can share that. You don't always have the 12th grade GPA when you need it. Okay? So a little more about non-cognitive assessments. So, again, this group in Minnesota and Wisconsin are incorporating those into their decision rules, and we don't know a lot about how good a job they'll do. Something, well, I'll talk about the specific ones in a moment, but they have at least the potential to provide more information than we have now, and that we have, just based on tests and college records. And one thing I should just mention, okay, so high school GPA, some people are talking about it as as partially a non-cognitive measure. So it's not only measuring students' content knowledge, it's measuring whether they turn in assignments, show up, do what it takes to finish, to do classes and get the grades and so on. So, let me just kind of put that into the mix here too. So there are several options out there, and we looked into some of them as we were doing this work in Minnesota and Wisconsin. You know, College Board has Success Navigator, ACT has Engage. They both have, you know, pretty good research behind them. They both cost something. In some cases, like in the example of the Success Navigator, there's actually a math or English recommendation for acceleration built into it, so it's something to consider. The grit scale has, you know, some decent research behind it. It also happens to have, like, I don't know if you did the 8 or the 12 item one, but you can put it right into the AccuPlacer. So one of the issues with a lot of these measures is just how to make it all work with your college system. So, you know, being able to put something within the AccuPlacer, or being able to ask the student GPA within the AccuPlacer is something to consider, you know. And there are questions about whether you should just replace, you know, do you actually need the test? That's something we're trying to study more too. We don't feel like we're at a point yet to be able to say much about that. Most of the colleges in Minnesota we're working with are using the Lassie, and there's some, you know, good research on correlations, especially between their motivation measures and success in college. So, any questions or topic, anything about non-cognitive assessments anybody wants to? Okay. So concerns about the high school GPA to your question. Okay, so let's just take a few minutes to talk about what concerns you might have. They might be these or they might be others. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes on this one, just to talk about what concerns you have about the high school GPA. Let's wrap up this conversation.
See how it works, you don't have to make any changes for
Yes. Anybody have any concerns about the high school GPA that aren't on the list up there?
They received it as a more consistent measure across the
Yeah.
So there is another one that's kind of similar to your different high schools grade differently. Is that even in different high schools, they have similar names for different courses, and it might not be transparent to us. If they have math classes where they're pulling students out and it's a 3-student class, and it has a similar title,
yeah.
and we don't know those kinds of things, or if they have a year-long class that, or a semester long. So
Yeah.
we've been working with the high school so we can understand what all their courses are.
Is that because you require a certain number of courses? Or a certain
No, but
type
it's part of
courses?
multiple measures.
Oh,
We realize that
Okay.
we don't know, you know, we don't always know what those math courses and those English courses are.
Okay, so that's a good one, yeah. Any other topics that have come up here that aren't on this list? Okay, so I've got slides on each of these, but to your point about the high school courses, so what most of the research has shown is the actual, like the math GPA and the English GPA, if you were to just pull those out separately, that they don't seem to predict beyond what just the overall high school GPA does. But that said, there are places where they really want to look at that, like in North Carolina, and it sounds like your college. You know, they are looking at in math, they're looking at the courses that students have taken and how they've done in those courses. And, you know, so, you know, I think there is, you know, there are people doing that, and I think it's a good thing to kind of keep doing it and looking at and seeing if you're getting extra value from looking at that. So the slides that follow here are mostly thanks to work that's been done in California by John Hadson and North Carolina by Brad Boston, because they've been doing a lot of conversations. They've been looking into these questions a lot and then having conversations with colleges around them. So the first thing is our test is better, right? So what they basically did is they looked at a whole, you know, mostly these are different versions of AccuPlacer, Compass, and Asset, right? And the last column on each of these is the GPA. And so basically what they were showing here is that none of the tests did a better job. Did a better job than the high school GPA. And, you know, again, this is in predicting actual course performance in college as opposed to like how students do on another test, right? So there's, some people will just say tests predict tests and grades predict grades, but that's a little simplistic. But anyway, you'll see, for the most part, and you may have a test at your college that, maybe you want to see if it actually does better, but, that's just one of those slides that are helpful, I think. Students would be better off going through developmental education. So some of my colleagues did an analysis of looking across lots of different studies of developmental education. And this is, looking back a ways, and I think there's lots of reform going on right now. But what we're basically seeing is that, if you look here at higher level students and lower level students, and the outcomes they get, the first column is the positive outcomes, the second are the null, like no effect kind of outcomes, and the third is the negative outcomes. So what we're seeing is a lot of evidence that developmental education, especially for higher level students, isn't doing a particularly good job, right? So, like I said at the beginning, I think it's really important that those opportunities be available, and I think it's really important that we keep working on improving developmental education, but we also want to be moving as many students as we can toward the college level courses. Are there any questions about this slide? It's a little, so this is summarizing different studies, and the brief that goes with this is on our website if you're interested in more information on that. Okay, how about over time? So one of the big questions is, what about a student who's been out of college for 3 years, 4 years, whatever? Is the high school GPA still going to do a better job? So, so that gray line at the bottom, that's AccuPlacer, right? And this is looking at these other, basically, the high school GPA in relation to AccuPlacer. So, yeah, so this was looking at the 11th grade and the 12th grade, and you can kind of see where they slowly get to be less predictive over time. But if you, the numbers across the bottom are numbers of semesters out of high school. So you can see that math, you're up to like 16 semesters before the AccuPlacer is doing a better job. And in English, well, it stops at 20, but that's, so basically what we're seeing is, yes, the high school GPA becomes less predictive, but it's still doing a better job in the test, right? Any questions about that? Yeah. Okay. High school grades. So now North Carolina is where the differences among high schools. And I don't know if we have like the last word on this, but they were concerned about this in North Carolina. So they did two things. One is that they just looked kind of across schools and colleges and found that the high school GPA tracked the college GPA pretty closely. The one strange one there is an extremely small college that I actually went to once. So they do, and then colleagues of mine also did research that shows that the high school GPA, the college GPA tends to be 0.6 below the high school GPA. That's pretty constant across schools. So it's something to keep an eye on locally, I think, but we're seeing more and more evidence that, whatever the high school and the quality of it in the courses, it's still going to, be a pretty strong predictor. Yeah.
When they're looking at high school GPA, were they separating out the math and the English,
No,
or they
no.
were just
They were
making a
looking,
decision for both math and English based on the GPA?
Well, in North Carolina, which is where this is from, they are taking into account the math sequences.
Okay.
In California, they're not. So different decisions are made in different places. And there is some research showing that it doesn't really help you to get a more predictive model to include the
Separate out the
to
math.
separate out the math and English, yeah. But worth keeping an eye on. And I don't think we've got final answers on a lot of this stuff. We're all trying to get better at it.
So, I think North Carolina's districts are countywide, whereas up here, we don't have them. So this is technically, would include the highest performing and lowest performing high schools all grouped in a county grouped as one.
That's
I'm assuming.
probably true,
Okay.
and I'm not sure, yeah,
Okay.
but I think that's a fair question, yeah,
Okay.
right. And you might wanna, maybe you wanna do an analysis, for your own feeder high schools, and
Right.
take a look at that. Yeah, and, assuming you've got the high school GPA and the high school in your data set, you can take a pretty good look at that, so. Okay. So we talked about the different ways of combining measures earlier on. So I just want to kind of give you some visuals to think about this. And so this is the algorithm example, and it's the one we used in the research with the SUNY colleges that we've just been involved in. Basically what happens is first, there might be some students that have exemptions, maybe based on, in New York State, it could be based on their state regents exams, right? That they automatically get placed into college level courses. But then, the rest of them are placed based on this algorithm. The way we got to that is we took 2 to 3 years of data from the college, and we used it to develop basically a set of weights that would best, the best kind of combination of weights that would predict success in college courses. We came up with that, but then the faculty set the actual cut scores. So we would give them information like, okay, if you place 70% of your students into college English courses, 80% of them are going to pass. But if you place 80% in, 70% are going to. So we kind of gave them those options, and they came up with the actual cuts that they're going to make. So there's, it's informed by this data, but it's still a decision faculty has to make, where they want to place students. So all of that data gets combined together within the college's IT system, and it can be done within AccuPlacer. There's a whole conversation to be had about kind of how to make that work. So a decision rule, so that would be, where instead of looking at the historical data, you're saying, okay, we're going to come up with some rules based on past research. And what we're going to do is, first there might be an exemption, and then the second thing we're going to look at is maybe the high school record, or it could be the AccuPlacer test. It could be either one. If a student does well on that, they'll go into college level. If they don't, in this example I've got here, they're going to take a test, right? And depending on where they go, they're going to get placed. So that's kind of a simpler. It doesn't require that historical analysis, but on the other hand, it's a little more, you're basing it on prior research and kind of your best knowledge, and so it's a little iffier, and you want to kind of monitor what happens as a result of that. You can make whatever decision you think is best as far as which you consider first. Now, so in North Carolina, they're using a system that's more like this, and some people call it a hierarchical system. This decision band is kind of like a variation. It's basically, say you take the test, the AccuPlacer, if you're above, if you're above the cut score is great. If you're, say, maybe just 10 points below, we're going to consider other factors. Maybe we're going to consider a high school GPA, maybe we're going to consider a non-cognitive test, something like that, okay? So these are kind of the common ways that this is done. The other one is informed self-placement, that we talked about, students making the call. And a lot of, sometimes they'll place themselves lower than we might have because they are worried about their math skills, and, so. Any questions about any of those ways of combining data? It has, and depending on what you do, it can really affect your admissions people, your testing people, your counseling processes, your IT. There's a lot of, it looks similar and simple in these diagrams, but there are a lot of pieces that go into this. Okay, so the last part of this part of the presentation is to talk about the study we've been doing. So we, Community College Research Center and MDRC, have formed, or basically got a grant to start a federal center to look at Center for the Analysis of Post-Secondary Research. And we're 4 or 5 years into this. So it's a separate center, but it's basically our two organizations. And we were funded to do 3 studies. One is a descriptive study just to look at who's doing what around the country in developmental education and in placement. So the initial results of that are out on our website, and more information is coming. The second one was to do a study of the New Mathways Project in Texas that some of you may know. using alternative pathways, statistics, quantitative reasoning, in addition to algebra, different students picking different pathways based on their career interests. And the third one is the study I'm going to talk about here, which is looking at the use of multiple measures, working with 7 SUNY colleges. And then there's also some other studies that have gone on. Okay, so this project, 7 SUNY colleges, basically a coalition of the willing. We're coordinating closely with the state offices, the SUNY central offices, both in working through the whole design, and also they're providing us data in addition to what the colleges are providing. Evaluating the use of predictive analytics, and I kind of talked about that system. We're randomly assigning students, so half the students are being placed using whatever the college had been doing, usually AccuPlace or alone, and half are being placed using this new system that weights different measures differently, right? We were also really interested in what it took to set these systems up, so we did implementation research, we did site visits to all the colleges, and tried to just understand who got affected and how, and what barriers, what kinds of challenges they faced. And we wanted to know about costs, because one real advantage of the single placement test is it's pretty cheap, right? And it's pretty efficient. You can kind of get a whole lot of students placed, as they show up at the beginning of the semester. So we wanted to see, what the difference was in cost. So current status, we've actually just released our first report, and the executive summaries in your folder, but there's a much longer report for those who want to really dig into the details. Okay, so this is what we were looking at. Does it actually make a difference in student outcomes? And what happens with adoption? Okay, here are our partner sites. None in New York City, spread pretty well throughout New York State. Big colleges, small colleges, rural, somewhat urban. Okay, so we've pretty much talked about this. So to put together these algorithms, got the data from the colleges, developed these models, tried to figure out what the best model was to actually predict. Limited by what colleges had in their systems, because not everybody collects that many data points from high schools, and in some cases colleges actually had to go and do a lot of data entry because they had a transcript and a PDF, but not the data entry. So faculty set the cut scores, and that was used in placement. Okay, so we started this study we started actually placing students using the study in the fall of 2016, and then we also worked with colleges to do spring of 2017 and fall of 2017. So now colleges, we're beyond the period of the study, and colleges are doing, some have kept the system going and some haven't, so there's discussion around that. But what we were able to get so far is results from the first cohort, the fall 16 students, and just data from their first semester in college, right? So they're, basically through the end of the fall 16, and that's what we reported in this first report. So we've got a total of, 4,729 students. Not too surprising, not everybody who was tested actually took a college level course. So we have 82% that actually enrolled in at least one course. And I should just mention these data from 5 colleges. We had 2 that took a little bit longer to get going, to get set up for the study. So treatment effects. Okay, first of all, math. So our first bar is our control group, and the second bar is our program group. And if you can you see the 3? So the first one is placement at college level. Second one is college level course enrollment. And the third one is enrollment and actual completion of the course. Successful completion. C or better. So, any observations on this slide?
So I have a point of curiosity in terms of your random selection and how you implemented that. These were mostly open access community colleges?
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming their enrollment comes to us like they come to mine, which is they show up and take a test.
Yeah.
How were you doing random how did you, can you give us any insight into how they did that random assignment?
Sure.
Because the variations are interesting, but I don't know how any other factors play into it.
Yeah, so when the students come in, there's a, basically a registration file set up. And, the colleges were given a randomized sequence of numbers that they stuck into that file. So when students went to take their placement test, either they were a program student, so, well, either they were a control student and just the active placer tests were taken into account, or they were a program student and the other data was mixed in, and either way a report came out. Does that?
Yeah, so it was in the point of admission, it was a point of
Yeah,
application.
yeah,
Okay.
before testing. Yeah. So anybody who didn't need to test, anybody who was waived was not in the mix. Okay. So what we're seeing is in math, it seems to be giving students something of a bump, right? So we're seeing, you know, more students placed into college level math, more students actually enrolling in college level math, which, as we know, students often don't take it their first semester, right? So there's going to be a difference there. But of the students who enroll, we see more students are completing. It's still obviously not as high as we would want to see, but it's higher, you know, so we're seeing like a 3 percentage point difference in the number of students who actually complete their college level math. Yeah,
Are these differences statistically significant?
good question, yeah. Everything in these next few slides, I should say, are statistically significant findings. We had a pretty good sample size, so, yeah.
Was there any breakdown in the students who enrolled and completed? Was there any breakdown on those taking calculus, track, math versus non-calc?
No, this is just, this is just any college level, any course that was designated as the first college level math course that we took. So it's all mixed
So,
in.
I don't know New York system. Do they have, I don't believe they have common course numbering, meaning Onondaga could call their college level math something that Schenectady could call, same course, but they could call it something different and have different course numbers.
Yeah, we sorted that through with each college wherever we had questions.
Okay.
You know, so, yeah, there are differences and it's fairly, you know, it's a lot's left up to the college and those kind of things. Okay. So this is English. Same bars, so control group, first bar, program group, second bar, placement, enrollment into college level, and enrollment and completion. So we're seeing actually really big effects here, right? So, I mean, this, you know, for those of you who've, you know, kind of looked at different initiatives, this isn't the kind of effect size we usually see, right? Those of us in the research world are saying, wow, so.
Yeah.
You know, this is only the, you know, like I said, that first semester, so we've got a lot more to learn, and in February, we'll get more data, and we'll be able to look at, you know, what happens with students, and, yeah.
Can I ask you to go back to the slide that spoke to what's part of the program group again in terms of what assessment are they taking? Is it multi-measure?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're still taking an active placer, or they're
Taking
taking
an
another
active placer.
placement test?
Yeah.
There's a non-cognitive assessment in that?
No,
So it's just placement test and high school outcomes?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that's basically what we had, right? And we didn't ask anybody. One college was considering using a non-cognitive and decided not to try to do it, so. Yeah, so in every case, it's placement test plus GPA, plus years out of high school, plus high school diploma. And in a few cases, there's like class rank or Regents test scores. And anything that we had that wasn't predictive, we didn't keep in mind. Anybody wanted to speculate why the math and the English are different? We're seeing much bigger effects in English than math.
Well, I think you touched on it a little bit. They may take the math at a later time in their academic sequence.
Yeah, so we have fewer students taking math
Mhm.
in the first semester.
I mean, I'm curious whether or not with the English, I think you have more of a chance for inconsistent grading across institutions. I mean, with the math, if they're giving a, Scantron test, the answer is the answer, and when you're grading essays, so I'll use Onondaga and Schenectady again. Onondaga may have a common rubric, and Schenectady may not, and so, I think the grading could play in.
But you still have a mix of students, in every class, so they're not separated into different classes or anything, right? So they should be, under whatever the same system is for grading. That's a good theory. Yeah. I mean, one thing we're thinking is that perhaps the math faculty were a little more conservative in where they set the cut scores. So, which, is understandable because you've got a sequence in math that you've got to go through, so I think there may have been, more concern about, kind of having more students going into college level. All right, so the other things we're looking at are, first of all, overall college level course taking, and we actually saw a small difference in the percent of students who took any college level course and those who completed any college level course. It's probably mostly driven by, those who went into those English courses, the extra English courses. But, you see a little, and again, these are statistically significant. And we saw a small treatment effect in the total college level credit students earned by the end of the first semester, which kind of surprised me, but, again, probably have to do with just a few more students in the college level courses. So the other thing we wanted to do is look at subgroups. And again, this is something we're really interested in looking at as we get more data into the mix. So this is math, and what we're seeing is that essentially every subgroup benefits. So we looked at race, ethnicity, well, basically just black, white, Hispanic. We looked at Pell, non-Pell, and we looked at female, male. The only place where we have a statistically significant reduction of the gap is in female to male, right? And you can just kind of see it as you look at that data in math. So women got more of a bump from being placed in this different way than men did, right? In the other cases, basically everybody's benefiting. It's not to the extent where we're actually seeing reduced gaps, statistically significant yet. And it may be the size of the sample.
Just out of curiosity, do you have completion on that too? I see placement in terms of there being a benefit. Do you have data on what the, yes?
Glad you asked. And the same kind of effect here. So the female to male gap is being reduced. The other ones, it's just like everybody's getting some benefit. Every group is getting some benefit. So this is the English results. And here we're seeing bigger improvements, I guess, or bigger impact on placement for Black and Hispanic students than for white students, and for Pell and for non-Pell, but it's not at the level that reaches statistical significance. Same on completion. Yeah.
Besides, I guess the three groups, Black, Hispanic, and white, were there other ethnic groups that you looked at, like Asian?
Yeah, we're just simplifying it.
Alright.
They were fairly small in upstate New York,
Okay.
so, yeah. But, yeah, in our full report, there's, other groups are included too.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Barnett, I have a question. Are you and your colleagues, if you haven't done it yet, or if you're currently working on it, and maybe the questions come up, I would be interested to see this same methodology, control group, program group, placement, and multiple measures applied to the Texas Mathways model.
Mm-hmm. Well, they are, basically, but they're not looking at placement there, but they're randomly assigning students into either pathways or regular classes.
Okay.
Is that what you were getting at, or you think you
Well,
want to replace one?
I'm just thinking, you know, you asked earlier, why do you think the differences are so much more significant in English as opposed to math?
Mm.
And one of them might be the relevancy of the math courses that the students are taking related to the majors that they're pursuing.
Yeah. None of these colleges were yet doing the math pathways,
Right.
although a lot of them were.
They're
talking
all
about it,
in
so,
the traditional, what
Yep.
we've done here in New Jersey for many
Yeah.
years.
Again, we wouldn't necessarily see that show up in this study, you know,
Right.
because of everybody's getting placed, but it
Right.
could, because of, you know, it could be that more, some classes are just kind of making a bigger difference for students.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, why don't you take a minute to talk about this at your table and any reactions you have, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So, in the interest of time, I'm not going to give you a discussion moment here, because I think we're running a little short, but I just wanted to start this off with thinking about basically overall processes versus programs. So, you know, one thing that I think the Community College Research Center has become increasingly convinced of is that, you know, programs can be useful and, you know, often can make a difference, but when I'm talking about programs, I'm talking about ones that are kind of focused on very specific groups of students, or, you know, targeting a specific need. But for the most part, we've got to be thinking bigger, that, you know, with the smaller programs, we're probably often not going to reach enough students to make a big difference. And we may do them to the exclusion of some of the bigger conversations we could have about changes in policy that could influence many more students. That doesn't mean that you know, maybe you still want programs, you know, maybe TRIO's doing a good job, or, you know, there are different programs that are, but I think we're just kind of encouraging people to think about ways to structure the overall experience for students as often as possible that doesn't just hit one factor. So, you know, and I think, you know, the guided pathways movement is a big piece of how we're thinking about that. So, kind of following on that idea, I just wanted to share a publication I did a little while ago, and it's pretty aligned actually with the JFF publication that you have in your, you know, in your packet. And in fact, this is one I did working with them. But, you know, the topic was, how do we get that momentum going in high school? So it's beyond the one program or kind of the one opportunity to get students ready, because college readiness is actually something that's building up over time, and it's not something that, you know, if you just hit it at the very end, you know, you're going to have some huge success. So, you know, are there ways that we can kind of help students to accumulate the kinds of experiences and attainments and so on that will actually get them to college readiness? So what I tried to do in this book, or report, and it's online, it's not a book, it's 20 pages or something, was to pull together the research with the hope that high schools and colleges working together could be trying to get as many students as possible to be college ready, and thinking about it a little more broadly. So there's the academic aspects, there's the, you know, non-cognitive, non-academic, whatever word you want to use, aspects. And then there's just the knowing what you're doing aspects, what I call college cultural capital. So if students could be ready in these three areas, and this is, you know, kind of aligned with David Conley's work and some other people, but I kind of narrowed, I used 3 instead of 4 categories the way you did. If you could get students moving toward college readiness in these 3 categories, it could make a big difference. So what I was proposing is that schools might consider using kind of a checklist and work with students to make sure that they're hitting the experiences they need, but also achieve, you know, the achievements or the attainments that would create momentum, so that we're hoping that by the time students graduate, they're more likely to actually be ready on all these different fronts and to do well. So, you know, we have these 3 categories, and I'm just going to talk about one of them here, but if you're interested in, you know, the report's called building student momentum from high school to college. It's on the JFF website and on ours too. So for example, research-based practices related to academic skill, knowledge and skills, participating in a rigorous core curriculum. So making sure and this is probably the counselors that would be doing a lot of this monitoring, making sure every student has got the access to the core curriculum. Every student is taking some kind of college level course experience. By the time they graduate, there's a much longer discussion about that in many of these. That every student is college ready and, has attained. So the E's are the experiences, the A's are the attainment. Every student has actually hit the college readiness benchmarks. Every student has gotten a reasonably good high school GPA. Every student has accrued at least 6 college credits. And there's some research supporting the idea that if you can get 6 college credits in high school, you've got more likelihood of hitting the benchmark. So, can we be monitoring each student, looking at these kinds of things? The actual elements could be adjusted, but the important thing I think is setting up systems to be helping every student get to the point where they can, have these kinds of experiences under their belt. So, with that in mind though, I wanted to focus in on the kinds of programs that you all are doing and that I've been paying a lot of attention to over time. So I'm going to share some research that we actually did quite a while ago, 2009, on developmental summer bridges, also using a random assignment design, so it's a rigorous study, and I think provides some interesting evidence that may be of use to you guys. And then I also wanted to share some information on transition courses, and that's a project that the summer bridge project was a while ago. The transition courses work is going on. So the developmental summer bridge study was done in Texas. We had 8 colleges that participated, and like the other one I described, we were interested in the impacts, whether it actually made a difference in student outcomes, but we were also interested in what it took to set these up and what it cost. And at the time in Texas, the state was giving out grants to colleges to do what they call developmental summer bridges. So it was a type of summer bridge that we thought was, was one that was pretty widely implemented and pretty likely to have a high level of success because everybody was required to do certain things, to include certain aspects in their design. So every one of these was done for students in the year between their senior year of high school and college. They were all sponsored by a college, they were located at a college. There were 4 to 5 week interventions. They all offered accelerated instruction, but not always in every topic. Some of them were just math, some were just English. Some were available to the student depending on what they needed, and they might take one, not the other. Every one of them included some kind of student support piece. So trying to, there were mentors, sometimes they did mentoring, sometimes they did, kind of advising and guidance, sometimes help with financial aid, that kind of thing. And everyone had a college knowledge component. So they had at least some sessions where students were getting information about how to do college and, introduced to different parts of the college campus and that kind of thing. And because there was a real interest in making sure that students completed, and especially, as part of, making sure that this study would actually work, students were given a stipend if they completed the program, $400. So that was a pretty good deal. It was also intended to help students to participate who might have felt like they had to take summer jobs otherwise. So it's, making sure that it was available to students who would be lower income. Okay, so, we got the word out, we worked closely with the colleges, got the word out widely in the community. Students applied, and each college had a certain number of slots, a certain number of students that they could serve, basically had to do with, groupings of like 20 to 25 in a class, right? So they were, they had a certain number of slots that they could serve. So students were chosen using a lottery, so that's essentially an assignment process. And we ended up, kind of used the ratio, I think, of 60-40, so 60% were selected into the program using the lottery and 40% were not. And we ended up with, close to 800 in our program group and a little over 500 in our control group. Everybody, the next columns are the people who were actually in the program group. Not everybody started, some of them ended up doing other things over the summer, but if they started, almost all of them finished. So 95% of the students actually completed if they had started the program. So, what did we learn about this? So first of all, the colleges did a really nice job of implementing the project. We went to the colleges, we learned what they were doing. They had enthusiastic faculty, they had, very interested students. Some students felt like the teaching they were getting was some of the best that they'd gotten, probably partly because they come from high poverty high schools. And so I think, we saw a pretty, strong level of implementation. As far as when we looked at impacts, we didn't find that, and we looked at impacts up to 2 years after participating in the summer bridge. We didn't see any impact on college enrollment and persistence, or on credits earned. But we did see an impact on students' completion of that first level college math and writing course, writing, primarily during the first year. So that looks like this. So this is each semester from fall 2009, which was right after the summer bridge, into spring 2010, summer 2010. So the first group is, first bar is the program group, second bar is the control group. So you see that there were more students who had completed their, college level math requirement in each semester. And then it kind of faded out toward the end. Basically, the control group students caught up. So by the spring following their summer bridge, 32% of the program group had completed their college level math requirements, as opposed to 23% of the control group. So, and we saw kind of a similar pattern in writing, although overall a lot more students were completing their basically college composition, right? But we saw that program students were doing better, and were more likely in each semester to have completed their college level writing requirement. As I mentioned, we also looked at costs. So these were not inexpensive programs to set up, and they had the advantage that they had some, state grant money to do it with. But there was a fairly big range per site, and there was also a pretty big range in cost per student, right, across the different sites. And some of it had to do with, some of them were paying for lunches and, bringing in extra mentors and things like that. So the average cost was $1,300 per student for those programs. So at the end of the day, and this is, after, after this somewhat extended study, what we came to thinking was that it took a lot to do a really nice job with these programs. And colleges were doing it. But they were expensive. It was hard to, they had to, kind of go through a whole process of designing, planning, recruiting, working with high school partners every year to do this. And at the same time, there were limited numbers of students who were really wanting to spend their summer that way. But at the same time, they were, successfully helping students to be ready for their college math and English. So the next thing we did in Texas actually is we did a kind of an inventory of different kinds of college high school math or college high school partnerships that were out there. We just wanted to understand the different things that were going on. Because in addition to these bridges, there were a lot of other, we've kind of run across all these other things. So we learned a lot, and a lot of it had to do with counseling and helping students to, kind of understand what they needed to be ready for college. And, often it was college counselors in the high school, sometimes helping as kind of part of the recruitment effort, sometimes it was broader and that kind of thing. But there were a couple of colleges that were actually offering, that one of the things they were doing was offering developmental education courses in the high school. And so we thought, oh, okay, this is a way to reach many more students, and to not have it cost a whole lot of extra, you know, so we started looking into that more. And we called them, you know, along with other people, transition courses. So what we were looking for really was two different things. First of all, what's going on as far as understanding where students are at in the 11th grade, what kinds of early college readiness assessments are being done, and are those special assessments, like is it the college going in and administering the AccuPlacer with the students, or is it, you know, using whatever the state test is and having a college level benchmark on it. And, you know, as we've expanded our research on that, we've seen, you know, both of those kinds of options. And then the question was, okay, if you know whether your students are college ready in 11th grade, you know, what can you do about it? So, you know, that was where we got into looking at transition curricula. So what is it that's embedded into the high school that could help students who are already, you know, known to be not ready for college in math or English to become ready? So we started, you know, studying those two topics and called it Reshaping the College Transition, because it's always nice to have a good name. At least I like it. Okay, so the idea with the college readiness assessments, just knowing that whether or not you're ready can be powerful. It can help both students and schools to get more students ready. And there's some nice research that was done out of California using their college readiness assessment system, California's early assessment, which I believe has changed since. But just students having that information seemed to have an impact on whether they were ready by the time they actually got to college. There were no other special interventions being offered at that time. There may have been in some schools, but this was looking across the state. So just having that knowledge seemed to be an important piece. But then transition courses. So our thinking was, or not ours, people doing this, okay, could you offer a full extra course in high school? Maybe it doesn't need to cost anything extra to do that, although we've seen various variation in the case. It can offer high school credit, so it counts towards high school graduation, so students want to take it. Of course, we know there's some differences in whether it gets accepted for math or English credit versus elective credit. That it would need to meet college's criteria for college readiness, so students who would actually complete the course could just be deemed college ready, ideally. And especially, you know, the case we saw in Texas where it was the college's developmental ed course, that was the case. Students passed it, they were considered college ready. And, you know, having that mechanism built in seemed like an important point. So that's the theory. At this point, we're still in, you know, even this many years later, we're still trying to figure out kind of what the evidence is telling us, and I'll share some of it with you. There's certainly some promising descriptive results that have come out of some of these courses around the country. But, you know, we're also getting some more rigorous research, and it's more kind of mixed. And I think a lot probably depends on the way the course is actually designed. So one of the things we just finished last year was an update of a scan we've done to figure out who's doing this kind of work around the country. So in 2012, we basically did a survey and then some follow-up interviews with a state rep from each state. And we found that for the most part, there were quite a lot of local efforts and a few state level efforts to do this kind of, to offer these kinds of courses. And when we looked again last year, there were a lot more, and it was pretty much driven by state level efforts. So what we're seeing is there are a lot of states such as yours, and you guys count as one of the state level efforts, where there's either been legislation or money or both to do this kind of work. And actually a lot of it is getting inspired, especially by Tennessee. Have you guys heard of the sales program there? Yeah, so, you know, that's one of the examples that legislators see and they go, oh, okay. So what we're seeing is a lot of action kind of in state level initiatives around this. One of the questions we asked was, can you rate the importance of each of these different kinds of goals for your courses in the state? So, you know, and then just, you know, aggregating them all together. what we saw is that the top goals really were exempting students from remediation and getting students ready for college, which is not surprising. But we were kind of curious to the extent to which people were emphasizing test prep per se, and also whether they were trying to get students thinking about majors or career directions in college, or increasing their knowledge about college. There's especially, as part of the guided pathways discussion, there's the hope that many more students will enter college with some idea of where they want to go. Because, one of the things that is being emphasized is this idea of, starting at least in some major, larger area, meta major, or concentration, or whatever you want to call it. So the more, we were thinking, okay, are these transition courses being used at all to help students think about that kind of thing? And we found for the most part it wasn't, it was in the mix as far as goals went, but not very high. Subjects taught, math and English, and a few of them were in other subjects. A few more states doing math and English. Instructional approaches used. A number of states, I think there were 17 that had more than one, but traditional face-to-face instruction was most common. Fair amount of computer-mediated, sometimes combinations, blended, sometimes modules where there would be, something that students could work on, as part of another class, something like that, and a few other, and I can't remember what those were. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about, any questions about that so far? Comments? So I just thought I'd talk about a couple of examples, where we've seen some research. This is, New York State's program that some of you may be familiar with. It's changed a bit over time. It's got a different name. It's now called the LINK program, and it's administered by the CUNY Systems Collaborative Programs Office. They were placing students ideally based on the Regents exams, although what was happening is that each school was really pretty autonomous, and they were making their pretty independent decisions about which students should go into these courses. The college actually developed the courses, the college system developed the courses in math and English. English seemed especially interesting in that they were basing a lot of the material on college level psychology or sociology material, with the idea that students should be reading actual college course material, as part of the instruction in English. Plus, it gave them the opportunity to talk about subjects that they thought would be engaging for students, understanding themselves, their peers, society, that kind of thing. Math was more traditional and more focused on trying to get students basically passing the compass test is what they were using at the time. And they had, at the time we did this research, they had 62 participating high schools. So we did some research on their outcomes using a difference in differences design, which I can talk more about if you want. But we were looking at these kinds of outcomes to see whether students who were in these courses did any better than students who were not in these courses, essentially. And what we saw was positive impact, but really small positive impact. So what we were seeing is between 1 and 2 percentage point differences in whether students passed a gatekeeper course within 1 year, were college ready on entry, enrolled in college within 1 year, and earned college level credits. So we thought, okay, that's good, but it doesn't seem very much like a very big difference. Right? And with English, the results were a little confusing. Again, we saw mostly positive impacts. For some reason, the college ready indicator seemed to be a negative, and we never quite could understand why that would be. The other ones were all positive, and like 2 percentage point differences passing the gatekeeper course, enrolling within a year, attempting a gatekeeper, college level credits. So we had some evidence that overall it was a positive initiative. And then in Tennessee, this is something that started at Chattanooga State College. One particular college thought that this would be a good idea to work with their college partners, and it's got picked up essentially by the governor, and it went statewide. But the approach was to use the developmental education modules that the college was using and have the students in the high school actually go through those modules, computer-based modules, while they were still in high school, while they were sitting in a classroom with a high school teacher there helping them and guiding them, and with a community college representative who would be coming and supporting the work. They would be kind of working with a high school teacher and also kind of providing the data, the data to help them understand how things were going and stuff. So it was the exact course that the community colleges were offering at that time. They've since moved to CODAC. And anybody who completed those modules was considered college ready. And some of them actually went on to take dual enrollment. They could finish those modules in semester 1 and take a dual enrollment class in semester 2. Okay, so they've got some really nice charts showing how many students completed. And we did some kind of follow-up research, basically just getting data from the schools themselves. And what we learned is that with the schools that we were visiting, the college students were completing at the rate of 47 to 65%, while the high school students were completing at the rate of 79 to 97%. So the high school students were much more likely to complete. Anybody want to venture a guess as to why?
Supervision?
Yeah, I think that's it. Those, control, supervision, high school students. Plus, they had to have it to graduate. If they hadn't finished, that was their high school math class. But it's kind of interesting to just think about that. Yeah. So there's some follow-up research going on the sales program, and the results are not yet out, but this is research being done out of Vanderbilt University and Harvard, and what they found is there's some initial suggestion that students are more likely to graduate high school, more likely to enroll in college. But we don't yet have the results, and I'm waiting for them eagerly on how students actually do in the next college level math. So, but like I said, enough people have been convinced that this is a good idea that it's now been picked up in a number of other states. Okay, so just some final comments. So the results so far are positive, but not like amazing. So I think what that says to me is people like you who are offering these courses, it's going to be really important to kind of look at the design. I'm really interested in what you're doing as far as combining the ALP, or combining the developmental with the college level work through the ALP that you guys are doing. You're up front on that. It's going to be really important just to think about ways to make sure that more students are really going to benefit from these experiences. Diverse views of college readiness, when you have situations like in New Jersey where, there are different, kind of different metrics for college readiness at different colleges, that makes it harder for the high schools, as I'm sure all of you are well aware as you work closely with high schools. So, having kind of clear messages about what the colleges want is really important, and not just in terms of the placement, of the content knowledge, but also in terms of student kind of skills and understandings. And then whenever there are those mechanisms that actually place students into college level when they get there, that seems really important. We saw some transition courses where there wasn't an automatic way for the college to know that a student had finished been successful in their course. So it didn't necessarily translate. Students ended up in dead end anyway. So those are kind of some final thoughts on that. And I don't know, what thoughts do people have, reactions, things that you're working on? Well, I'm at Barnett at tc.edu, so feel free to reach out. I'm especially interested in what you guys doing at ALP are doing in the high school. I think other people need to hear about that, so look forward to hearing more about that from Donna and others, and hope this has been useful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.